We're going to take a look now at the formation of blood cells. When you consider the formation of blood cells, obviously we're talking about how you make formed elements. Those red blood cells, white blood cells, and also the platelets that we mentioned earlier. Considering where this happens, first of all, within the human body, it typically takes place within red bone marrow when we consider mature adults. There's some other places where this process plays out in a fetus and sometimes when we're in younger adolescents, but typically, once again, in a mature adult, only takes place in red bone marrow. The process of making or forming these blood cells has a specific name, and you should be familiar with that. It's referred to as hemopoiesis or in some cases hematopoiesis. I usually refer to it more often as hematopoiesis. Now, I'm going to kind of talk to you about a few concepts. There's a diagram or a figure from your book, figure 19.3. We'll take a look at that here. When you consider this process of hematopoiesis, once again, which plays out within the red bone marrow, it all begins or relies upon the presence of a cell type called a pluripotent stem cell, and you see that at the top of your screen there. That pluripotent stem cell is an undifferentiated cell, meaning it hasn't quite figured out what it wants to be quite yet, and it's located in red bone marrow. That pluripotent stem cell has the capability of becoming any formed element, be it a red blood cell, any one of your 5 white blood cells, or even a platelet. So if we go back to our image here, our previous slide rather, you can see that, as I tell you in this slide, that this process of hematopoiesis begins with that pluripotent stem cell, and it can basically become any formed element that's necessary. Now, typically what happens is that the development of this pluripotent stem cell is regulated by a series of growth factors and also hormones. For the purposes of this course, you don't really have to familiarize yourself with any of those growth factors, except for one that we'll talk about in the subsequent lecture, though. But in any case, those growth factors and hormones are going to influence that pluripotent stem cell and try and force it or drive it toward becoming whatever formed element that your body may need. Now, if you take a look at the image here, you'll see that from the pluripotent stem cell, you're either going to go toward the left or the right-hand side. So there's kind of only one of two options, at least in that first step, that pluripotent stem cell can take. It can either become a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. Now, once that pluripotent stem cell starts down the pathway of development by becoming a myeloid or a lymphoid stem cell, its options are going to be a little bit narrowed. And for, once again, the purposes of this course, you need to know what those options are depending upon whether you have a lymphoid or a myeloid stem cell. So let's take a look at the lymphoid stem cell first. It's going to be the easiest of the two to try and deal with. And if you take a look at the lymphoid stem cell and follow the arrows that lead down or inferior from it, you'll see that all the cell types that arise from a lymphoid stem cell are going to be different types of lymphocytes. Your T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes, or for short, you can call them T cells and B cells, and then also your natural killer cells, which are also a type of lymphocyte. So the only thing that you can have develop from a lymphoid stem cell is going to be some type of lymphocyte. Once again, whether it's a T, B, or NK cell, it all just depends. Next, we want to take a look at what comes from a myeloid stem cell. The myeloid stem cell has a vast variety of options because essentially, if it's not a lymphocyte, it comes from a myeloid stem cell. So when we look at the lineage here of a myeloid stem cell, you'll see that it can become a red blood cell, platelets, an eosinophil, basophil, or neutrophil. Those are your various granular leukocytes. And then it can also become a monocyte, which ultimately becomes a macrophage when it's active. So you can develop all the other formed elements from that myeloid stem cell, which is why I usually start out by looking at the lymphoid stem cell because its options are much more narrow. Now, there are some different stages of development in association with some of these cell types, but you don't have to know those. If you look across that kind of line where there's a bunch of kind of pale blue boxes, these are all blast cells. Blast cells are immature cells, but their lineage has already been determined. If you recall, maybe from A&P1, they talked to you about osteoblast. Yes, I know we mentioned already in this course that they build bone, but once again, osteoblasts ultimately become osteocytes, which are the mature cells found within bone. Well, it's the same kind of setup here. Blast cells are always destined to become the mature version of whatever cell type that they may be. But for the purposes of this course, once again, keep in mind that this process of hematopoiesis plays out in red bone marrow. It depends, or it starts, I should say, with that pluripotent stem cell, an undifferentiated cell. Due to the effects of various hormones and also growth factors, that pluripotent stem cell is going to be driven toward becoming either a lymphoid or a myeloid stem cell. If it becomes a lymphoid stem cell, the only thing that can result from that will be some type of lymphocyte, be it B, T, or NK cell. And then if it becomes a myeloid stem cell, ultimately it can become any of the other formed elements except for a lymphocyte, which would include red blood cells, platelets, eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, and also monocytes.